Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. Joining us back here on the program today is Roland Evans of Bounty, and he's going to share with us how we can grow giant vegetables. Imagine just being able to feed the whole neighborhood with a big, large zucchini, pumpkin squash, carrot, beet, you name it. So we're going to talk about what all the details are that are involved, and then that way you can get started right away to feed your neighborhood, enjoying this wonderful October month. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program, Roland Evans. And Roland, thank you for joining us again today.
Thanks very much, Daniel. It's very good to be with you.
You bet. Now, the secrets of growing giant vegetables, of course, you have to start off with choosing the right seeds.
And that's right. And actually, you can actually go online nowadays and find all sorts of seed companies that actually specialize in giant vegetables or big plants. And what you're looking for is particular genetics, because the genetics of the plant will determine to some extent the size, the height, the weight of the plant that you're going to grow. And so once you've chosen those seeds, particularly the variety that you want to grow, then you're really on your way. And, of course, before you do that, you have to realize that growing giant vegetables is going to require quite a lot of dedication and love, as well as skill and knowledge. So you have to decide if it's the right thing for you to do.
Now, the other thing you talk about is propagate early. What exactly do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that you need to start your seeds inside. You're going to start them much earlier in the season than you would for normal seeds. You might be starting, for instance, growing your giant cabbage or your giant, carrot in December. You'll be starting to plant those in planting mix in pots. And you'll want to plant maybe 4, maybe even 5 seeds per big pot, not small pots. You want to have them fairly big so that as they grow up, you can pick out those ones which look weakest and leave behind just the strongest of all your pots, your plants. So you're thinning out the smaller seedlings, and you're just growing those biggest, strongest plants, and you're growing them on and potting them up regularly. So you never want the roots of the plant to ever get compressed or to have not enough room to expand.
So keep things loose, in other words.
The roots are really important. You have to think that you're going to have as much roots below the surface as you have plant above the surface. So, of course, if you're trying to grow a giant plant, you've got to think it needs a giant root system.
Otherwise, we've got Attack of the Killer Eggplants roaming the neighborhood.
Right.
Now, the other thing that's very important also, now that we've propagated early, which you recommend December, January, doing pretty early, like you said, use large pots with at least 4 seeds in each, and thin out the smaller seedlings and keep the strong ones going here. The next thing is to prepare the soil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've got to choose your growing space, so there's plenty of sun and moisture, and you need to allow a lot of room around your plants, maybe 2 to 5 times as much as normal. And you've got to prepare that soil well with lots of organic compost, lots of nutrients, minerals, and you want to keep those organic because those actually will grow the biggest. And the secret of my success and my brother's success, who grows the biggest vegetables of all, is compost tea, is the kind of brewing up nutrients and microorganisms into this rich, fertile liquid that you put on the soil, and you get all of that biology working for you. So you feed the soil in order to feed your plants.
That's really, really interesting, as opposed to just using the typical fertilizers that you find in most stores.
Right. Yeah, healthy soils are what grows really healthy plants.
And then our next step is to transplant carefully. And I know this is really important. As my mother used to say, you don't want to shock the plant too much.
Right. Yeah. You want to really be very careful about the root ball. That's the roots and the soil around the roots, so that when you're transplanting, if you're transplanting from one pot to another or you're transplanting from the pot into the ground, you want to disturb those roots as little as possible because it does create shock. And you also want to make sure that your soil temperature is right for the plants that you're trying to grow. So, for instance, if you're using a cool weather plant, like a cabbage or a cauliflower or a beet, then you want to be planting it in fairly cool soil. But if you're trying to get a giant marrow or a giant pumpkin, you need to really make sure, or a giant tomato plant, you want to make sure that the soil is really warm. So you're transplanting carefully, and your goal is to create a very large root system as much as possible. And you need to use something which is a kind of specialist product called mycorrhizae. This is a particular fungus which will actually connect to the roots and will actually make them probably as much as 10 to 100 times as efficient in picking up nutrients and moisture.
Wow.
It's a very specialized product. It's easily available. It's mycorrhizae fungi, and you put that actually around the roots when you're transplanting.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have known something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I should add though that you use that for most plants except the cabbage family. The cabbage family don't need it.
Okay. And choosing a growing space is definitely important because some plants thrive better than other plants in certain areas.
That's exactly right. So you don't want to put your cabbages in the heat of the sun. You want them maybe a little shaded, but you definitely want your tomatoes with plenty sunlight and lots of space, particularly if you're growing tall ones. You know, the biggest tomato plants that they're growing now, mine grow only really, I don't grow very big ones, maybe 10 to 12 feet high, but people are up at 20 feet, 25 feet, very hard to kind of pick those tomatoes when they're that high. You need a big ladder.
That's for sure. Oh, I'll tell you. And it's the other thing too is it's really important. I remember reading in The Secret Life of Plants is to nurture. I mean, these are living organisms that are very well connected, actually.
Yes, yeah, you need to nurture them. As I say, you need to put a lot of love into this. It's not just skill and it's not just technique. You've got to love those plants, and I know that sounds strange, but you're going to have to be going out there every single day, maybe twice a day, to look at them, to make sure there's no bugs on them, to make sure that they're not stressed in any way. You're going to be giving them plenty of room. You're making sure there's not any weeds around them, and you want to keep them damp with regular deep irrigation. Drip irrigation's the best. If you can dechlorinate the irrigation water, that's actually a big plus because the chlorine in the water can sometimes stop some of the microorganisms in the soil growing well. And you're feeding with compost tea and organic nutrients, and you're mulching very well. So you're looking after it and loving that thing. My brother actually would play music to his giant plants. I haven't quite got that far, but he would say classical music is really the stuff to make your plants grow happy and well.
Well, it's certainly better than heavy metal, probably, unless you want to really rowdy beat.
Right. Actually, there's some research on that, too.
And protect and support.
Right, yes. You're protecting your plants from the weather. So row covers, they're called floating row covers, or plant protectors of some kind, particularly when you first transplanted them, and they're most vulnerable to insect and weather. You want to protect them pretty well. You wanting to keep the weeds down, maybe have a weed barrier, or as I said, with mulch around them. And then, of course, if you're growing big plants, say if you're growing your big, tall tomato plants, you've got to support those very well. You've got to have cages, maybe 2 foot across, very, very sturdy, and they need to be bound together with wire. If you're doing that, if you're making a giant pumpkin, for instance, you've got to be very careful that you don't allow the first pumpkin that you're going to grow to be too close to your plant. Because as it grows bigger and bigger, and they can grow, 4 feet, 5 feet high, if it's too close to the plant, it will drag that plant out of the ground. So you need to give it plenty of space.
And then finally, it's knowing your plant needs.
Right, and this is where you need to read your books and learn as much as you can, because each plant has different needs. Some like it cool, some like it hot, some will be attacked by certain things, some will be attacked by other things. As I was saying, with the squash, you need to actually give it plenty of space, maybe as much as 50 feet. With a carrot, for instance, you would actually be looking at planting that maybe in a big tub on top of the soil with an empty hole in the bottom of the tub so it could put its roots right down, because the roots may go down as much as 6 feet. So every single plant has its own needs. And once you know those, you're going to find yourself growing bigger, better plants every single year.
Well, Roland, can you give out a website?
It's www.bounty.com.